I am calling to order the meeting of the Management Committee on this beautiful fall day of September 13th. We've got all the information before us today, and with that, the agenda is before us. If there are no changes, without objection, I'm going to move forward, and the agenda has been approved. We've also received the Management Committee meeting draft minutes from August 23rd. Has anybody got any changes or edits? Anything they want to say about that? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve those draft minutes.
So
moved by Barber, seconded by Cedarberg. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, and that passes unanimously. We'll now move on to our non-consent business items. We've got reports of our standing committees. We've got item 2023-159, the Metro Green Line Extension Legal Services Contract Sole Source. It's Amendment 3 with Best and Flanagan. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Joan Hollick. I'm the Deputy Project Director for the Green Line Extension, here to present 2023-159. As Madam Chair stated, this is the sole source amendment number 3 to the Best and Flanagan Legal Services Contract. The requested action today is that the Metropolitan Council approve a sole source amendment for the legal services for real estate acquisition for the Green Line Extension project with Best and Flanagan to increase the contract amount by $150,000 for a full contract value of $1.525 million. This item does go back some time. Back in November 2016, the council approved that the project begin the real estate acquisition process that's necessary prior to initiating construction. Then in March of 2019, the council issued an RFP for legal services for a master contract associated with the real estate acquisition process. As a result of that RFP, 3 master contracts were assigned, totaling up to $2.2 million. The contract executed with Best and Flanagan totaled $1.25 million of that total amount. Since the contract award, Best and Flanagan have been supporting our Office of General Counsel, project staff, and MnDOT staff in the real estate acquisition for the project. To date, the project has completed 141 of 167 required acquisitions. Amendment 3 before you today is requested in the amount of $150,000, bringing the total contract value to $1.525 million. The amendment before you will provide the following services for our real estate acquisition process, specifically assisting the council in resolving attorney fees for parcels in which Best and Flanagan has supported the acquisition, as well as providing additional legal support in the condemnation process for parcels in which Best and Flanagan have supported acquisition. Authorization today is necessary to provide the ongoing successful litigation of parcels in condemnation, and this amendment is before you today because the value exceeds 10% of the original contract value. Madam Chair, I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councilmember Barber.
thank you, Madam Chair. Joan, just a quick question. Do you think this is the last amendment to this because we're getting so close?
Madam Chair and member, I do believe that. We have been monitoring the process very closely. This amendment was necessary because some of the parcels tend to take longer than we can anticipate, but our team, along with the support of the Office of General Counsel, have really evaluated the outstanding work, and we do anticipate that this will be the last request for this contract.
That's great. Anything else? All right, seeing none then, I would entertain a motion to approve the Metropolitan Council approve a sole source contract amendment for legal services for real estate acquisition for Southwest Light Rail Transit project based with Best and Flanagan to increase the contract amount by $150,000 to a total contract amount of $1.525 million. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Barber, is there a second? Second. Seconded by Cedarberg. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. And that passes unanimously. So thanks, Joan. Appreciate that report. And thank you to everybody working on that. 141 out of 160 is good. Very good news. All right, now we've got our second non-consent business agenda item. It's 2023-174. It's a joint same week amended budget, and we've got with us Mr. McMullan. Welcome, Stewart. And we can't wait to hear about this next budget amendment.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Again, my name is Stewart McMullan, Budget Director here at the Council. I'm bringing forward to you business item 2023-124 SWJT, the third quarter budget amendment that is being amended again in this proceeding. After review and approval by the Transportation, Environmental, and Community Development Committees, this committee reviewed and approved this amendment on August 23rd. Subsequent to that approval, MTS received confirmation from the FDA on federal support for two fleet modernization projects in the MTS ACP. So those federal dollars have been added to this amendment in the MTS ACP. Additionally, they have added $150,000 to the MTS planning budget for a study in the operating budget. These additions to the amendment were reviewed and approved by the Transportation Committee on Monday, September 11th. With the exception of those additions, the amendment is exactly the same as reviewed and approved by this committee, as well as the Environmental and Community Development Committees. A procedural note on this amendment. This amendment would go to the full council tonight. The tables in this amendment take the existing capital budget as it is now and adds to it as reflected in the tables. Also on the agenda is a second capital budget amendment for the Blue Line Extension project tonight. The Blue Line amendment also takes the existing budget, capital budget, as it is now and adds to it. If both of the amendments are approved tonight, the tables will then be adjusted to reflect the cumulative impact of both of the amendments from the council actions. The motion is that the Metropolitan Council authorizes the 2023 unified budget as amended and in accordance with the attached tables. That summary, I could answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you, Stewart. Are there any questions from the committee? All right. Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to proposed action is the Metropolitan Council authorizes the 2023 unified budget as amended, as indicated in accordance with the attached tables and as Mr. McMullan has described to us today. Is there a motion? So moved by Cedarburg. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Barber. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. That passes unanimously. So thank you, Stuart, for your hard work on this. Appreciate it. We're now moving on to our information portion of the agenda, and we've got as our first item the proposed Metropolitan Council Triennial FTA DBE goal and Triennial EPA DBE goal. And we've got Mr. Payne, Ashanti. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Council and Committee members. Ashanti Payne, Assistant Director of the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity, and I'm pleased to be before you today along with the University of Minnesota Roy Wilkins Center and Dr. Myers to present our goal methodology for both the Federal Transit Administration and Environmental Protection Agency Federal DBE program. I would like to say that this is the first time in the council's history that we used an outside consultant to do this work, and there are some very key points and rationale to why we did that. One, just from an objectivity and transparency component to it. Two, this is feedback that we've been receiving along the way from both the vendor community, our advisory committees, the Equity Advisory Committee, to have a third party look at this as a best practice. And lastly, in my experience, when you use the methods we have been doing, you do it in-house, you do the most simplest method to comply in a lot of cases, and you're basically counting what you're doing in the program as opposed to what you might could achieve as a goal. So Dr. Myers does this work across the country, well respected, and definitely another key point, legally defensible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Myers and his team, and also I will be available for questions as well.
Thank you. And welcome, Dr. Myers. We're very happy to have you here today.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm honored to be here today to share with you the results of a I guess I would say a 9-month research project. Preface my remarks by saying that the guidance that FTA provides for providing the Triennial DVE goals the guidance really doesn't tell you how to do it. Moreover, the website that provides a summary of advice to recipients of FTA, FHWA dollars has a little clause on it that says that this advice is not legally binding. And so the methodology that we've been using since 1992, when we began to provide assistance to New Jersey Transit and also to other state and local governments, including Minnesota Department of Transportation, is one that has been subjected to litigation in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals and in the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, and has been published in various documentation. And in summary, the methodology follows these steps. So the first step, well, I'm going to talk about the methodology and then I will present the results of the application of this methodology for FTA, EPA, and I'm going to try to explain why we've been very cautious and conservative in doing these calculations, largely to either protect Metropolitan Council from litigation or minimize the likelihood that if there is litigation, that you are not successful. I want to talk about FTA and EPA separately, even though all the work was done at the same time. And I will mention a comparison between the results that we have obtained using the methodology I will describe and the results you would have obtained had you used the methodology that you previously used in-house. So, we'll make this work.
Greg, is there a way for you to advance the slides from the control room?
So while Ashanti's making it work, I'll describe the fact that the methodology begins with several steps. Step number one is to establish what the geographic market area is.
There we go.
And the geographic market area is where 75% or more of your dollars have been spent. In the past, we've looked both at political geographic market areas as well as virtual geographic market areas, but it turns out that the political geographic market areas, meaning the counties and the metropolitan area, largely exceed the 75% dollars. So all the methods of calculating geographic market areas were counting counties. And it turns out that you do have a couple of contracts outside of Minnesota, but still the vast majority of the dollars are within Minnesota. So the second step is to obtain from Metropolitan Council the forecast of the expenditures over the next 3 years. I'm not involved in that. This is your job to tell me how you plan to spend your money. And it turns out that you plan to spend your money in the next 3 years in ways that are a distinct departure from how you spent your money in previous years. I'll discuss that very briefly. Now, the third step is to compute the base availability rate. And the base availability rate is to be the willing, able, qualified, disadvantaged business enterprise as defined by the Department of Commerce as well as the Small Business Administration. It's important that the base availability rate has never been defined. The methodology for computing the base availability rate has never been defined. Rather, different companies around the country. So there are about 10 major companies that produce these analyses. They usually charge $1 million in order to do studies like disparity studies. Across the country, there are different methodologies. and every methodology, every method of computing the base availability may have some advantages and disadvantages. The methodology that the University of Minnesota uses, and the one that I support as an objective analyst, is one that combines all the different methods. And so rather than pick just one method, we compute each different way and report all the results. But we don't choose the one that's the best one. Rather, we average across them using weights that are a function of the geographic market areas. The logic of it is that there are a lot of different measures. Rather than pick and choose among them others, we acknowledge the fact that it's almost like if you do different trials, in every trial you get a different result. And what is the best estimate of the outcome? It's the average. Okay, or the weighted average. So that's what we do for the third step. The next step is to make an adjustment to the base goal. The language in the original guidance is very specific about what you can do to make an adjustment. As an economist, I would argue that the most logical adjustment is to adjust for discrimination, adjust for market discrimination, adjust for agency discrimination, where I'm using discrimination in a very mechanistic way. I'm not using it in a way of an accusatory way. Rather, it's differential treatment of identically situated business firms. Now, that is the easiest adjustment to justify, but it's the hardest adjustment to compute. And so that's the methodology we use. It turns out that the econometrics of measuring discrimination is kind of a retrospective method. It looks at what would have happened had a DBE been treated like a non-DBE. And so there are two interesting issues that have to be dealt with when you do this but-for type adjustment. The first is, are we talking about primes or are we talking about subs? Are we combining primes and subs? And for one of your projects, you didn't have any primes who were DBEs. And so no amount of statistical analysis is going to generate an estimate of differential treatment of identically situated individuals. I think the second type of issue is, well, how do you account for identically situated? And the methodology we use is to account for size, tenure, credit rating, industry, geographic market area. So the idea is let's use observables in order to match, the equally qualified DBEs, non-DBEs. And so that adjustment actually is sensitive to what econometric technique you use. And what we've done is that we have done it along each of the established methodologies, and then average those, rather than picking and choosing among one or two estimates. Then finally, the argument is that the DBE goals should maximize the race-neutral portion of goals. The theory here, which we've published extensively in econometric journals, is that the number of dollars that would have gone to DBEs in the absence of a DBE goal should be maximized. And so we use an algorithm in order to ask how much would Metropolitan Council have allocated to DBEs if it didn't have a Triennial goal. And the answer is it's computable, but it has to be adjusted for the size, the tenure, the NACE codes, for the credit records and other characteristics. So those are the main, methods that we use in order to compute these goals. So let me start with the FTA goal. And so the bottom line is that the number we computed is 13.4%. The method that we use to get that starts with the availability rate, which is weighted average of availability across 5 legally, economically valid methods. And I think those methods are the bidders list. And so you take all the bidders and you find out what fraction of the bidders are DBEs. Okay, this is like, the problem is that you don't have bidding for subcontracts. So one of the disadvantages of the bidders list method is that it privileges prime contractors. And then the second method is vendors list. That takes you a long list of all the vendors and it calculates it. Did I say that it calculates it based on the future expenditures, the share of your dollars in your 6-digit NAICS codes. So it doesn't just take the total number of DBEs divided by the total number of firms or bidders or vendors. Rather, it weights it by the forecast number of dollars you expect to have. The list that we got from you. The next thing is that the vendors list does have a problem. There are some people on the vendors list who've been on the vendors list for years, and it's kind of hard to justify including people who are out of business that are on the vendors list. So you have something called the active vendors list, and you have something called, I'm not sure what you call the other vendors list. And so we made the decision only to focus on firms that are alive. And so we went to the Attorney General's office, we went to the Department of Revenue to find out what those firms that were still paying taxes. I mean, the idea is you really want people, the vendors, to be vendors that are willing, able, and qualified. Unfortunately, there are some people on your vendors list that we couldn't locate. I'm not sure whether it's because they didn't fill out their forms or whatever. So unfortunately, we had to eliminate people that we couldn't match, with Dun & Bradstreet's NAICS codes. And what's the bias associated with doing that? Well, not everybody has Dun & Bradstreet NAICS code, and you're not required to have a Dun & Bradstreet NAICS code, to the best of my knowledge, in Minnesota. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So, but I do think, just as an aside, maybe we should start encouraging our DBEs to get a Dun & Bradstreet, NAICS codes. Because if you want to borrow money, or if you want to get a federal contract, you pretty much have to have a NAICS code. You pretty much have to have a Dun & Bradstreet code. So the first method is the bidders list. The second method is the vendors list. There's something called the American Business Survey list. Now, this is the gold standard for calculating the number of women minority-owned business enterprises. And this data set is the successor to the survey of business owners. It's really, really the gold standard. But there's a limitation, and the limitation is that for privacy purposes, I don't know the names of individuals. I can't match them with your DBE list. However, what I can do is I can determine what their revenues are. I can determine what their NAICS codes are. And in order to be qualified for, to be certified as a DBE, there is a net worth and there is a revenue threshold. And so what we do is we can compute the number of women and minority firms that would be eligible for DBE qualification based on their network and their revenues. And by the way, we also eliminate the double count. And so it's the women, the minority, minus the women and minorities. Then the fourth method is the DBE list method. And that's the method that Metropolitan Council's used in the past. This is the only method where the numerator and denominator come from different places. The numerator is the DBE list. The denominator is the census business pattern or the zip code business pattern data. And there's some advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is easy to compute. The disadvantage is the numerator and denominator come from different places. It's not the same people that we're talking about in the numerator and denominator. Moreover, there is the problem of Minnesota is a small state. And so the ABS is a national sample. And the ability to identify smaller units like zip codes or census tracts, or for that matter, even counties, is limited because of masking that the census uses when it releases the public data. And as a result, this is a better measure of the state's availability rate as opposed to county or metropolitan area. Then the next method is, that's 5 methods. And so we average those, The fifth method is the Dun & Bradstreet method. And so the Dun & Bradstreet method does have the disadvantages that you have to be in Dun & Bradstreet, but it has the advantage that it's the numerator and the denominator. And so the main difference between Dun & Bradstreet method and the ABS method is the fact that the Dun & Bradstreet method is not a survey, it's a count, it's a census. And so it does have some wealth. And by the way, it also has the names, address, the zip code, the telephone numbers, the websites, it doesn't have disbarment information, but it has a lot of information that you can match with other data sets about whether or not a firm is being sued or whether or not the firm has not paid its taxes and so forth. So the Dun & Bradstreet method is a very powerful method, and we've used that in our analysis. Now, here's the bad news. The bad news is that you have a zip code. You have a NACE code called 485113. 485113 accounts for 61% of your future dollars. And all the years I've been doing DB goals, I've never seen one category that accounted for 2/3 of all your expenditures. So, just using the category, by the way, 485113 is
Transit Operation Services. So that would be Minnesota Valley, Transit, Southwest, those Maple Grove, those contracts. Also our paratransit services, I don't think that is as well.
So one method is, but I believe the number of 485113. And if I believe the number, then using DBA, there's only 3.8% that's available across all the different geographic market areas. If you use the American Business Survey, it's 15.2%. If you use the bidders list or the vendors list, it's 8% or 6%. And then if you use the Dun & Bradstreet method, it's 6.8%. So the average to the base is 8%. But suppose you don't believe, the 485113. Suppose that you believe that people who provide transit services, operations, mobility services for the disabled, suppose they go to the census website and look at the substitutes, look at the complements, look at the things. And so it turns out that a lot of companies that could compete for providing
Transit Operation Services.
I was about to say disability service. Okay, so I'm talking about Metro. Metropolitan. Because Metropolitan is not a big bus. Metropolitan is a van. Okay, so it turns out that there are more firms that would turn up, particularly using DBE lists. But the DBE list is Minnesota specific. So we're not using our DBE list, we're not using Nebraska DBE list, we're just using Minnesota DBE list. And so that has raised a question. It raised a question about whether or not by focusing only on Minnesota for your DBE list, you're ignoring the reality that some of the bidders on your contracts for transit operations are not from Minnesota. In fact, the biggest companies that provide these services, I'm not talking about people who own the buses. I'm talking about people who manage the buses, the schedules, and other things. There are a couple of companies around the country that do this. They're in Ohio, they're in Michigan, there are other places. And they actually have contracts from you right now. So the alternative to using the 485113 is to use the mix of calculations, and then you're using the DBE list, the number goes up. It goes up from 3.8% to 15.1%. Then there's another method, not to say, let's replace 485113 with the national average, arguing that if a lot of companies already are bidding on things, it's like a accounting company. So the accounting company might not have its headquarters located in Minnesota, but if it gets a contract with the state of Minnesota, with Metropolitan Council, or open up an office. And so having an office in Minnesota is not the same as being located in Minnesota. And so in that case, the calculation goes up to an average of 11.4%. So we got 8%, 9.5%, 11.4%, and what we decided to do was average across those averages, and that is 9.6% as the base. So that's the FTA base, and the logic is that we're trying not to game the system, but rather to incorporate in analysis all of the various strengths and weaknesses. Then the adjustment to the base code uses two different standard methodologies for computing the but-for calculation of discrimination. And one methodology produces 55% unexplained gap, another is 45%. And the difference depends on whether or not you include small contracts. Okay, small contracts under $10,000. So the problem is that the data set, these are all averages. But the moment that you start having a tail, a lot of numbers at the bottom of the distribution is driving some of the results. So you want to ask the question, should I do this analysis both with the ones at the bottom and without the ones at the bottom? And so what we've done, we've included both. It turns out that the methodology does make some assumptions about how the independent variables are entered. There's a newer methodology that is now making its way around the literature. I'm going to get the names of it. So one name is called the Oaxaca decomposition, and the other is called the Galbach decomposition. The Galbach kind of makes it clear that how you enter the independent variables affects what the unemployed portion is. And so we calculated that, and then the displayed portion turns out to be 30% or 27%. So rather than pick between the blind Oaxaca and the Galbach decompositions, we average between the two, and the average is 39.9%. So let's go back. So we're talking about a 9.6% base. And then we're going to do an adjustment to that base of 39%, 39.9%. So what you do is you multiply 9.6% times 1.399, and that gives us the new base. And that gives us the adjusted amount. So that adjustment amount, so that's a base of 9.6, and there's an adjustment of 30%. So 9.6 times 1.399 equals 13.4%. And then the next step is to decompose the portion of that, break that 13.4% of the two parts. The race neutral part and the race conscious portion. So with that said, let me talk about EPA. Okay, EPA has a goal of 11.9%. Now, what's different about EPA is, number one, is we're not talking about a lot of contracts. We're talking about relatively few contracts. Second thing about EPA is that there were not a lot of DBE primes. Okay, so the bottom line for EPA was that we started with a base across 3 availability methods. Now, why did we only focus on 3? It's that we didn't have enough data, for the other, 2. And should I also point out that there's no rule for EPA. So I'm applying the U.S. Department of Transportation rule for FTA, FAA, FHWA to EPA, but EPA is a completely different agency. And EPA doesn't really, hasn't issued an advisory. And so I meant that we are applying a Department of Transportation methodology to something that's substantively different. Okay, so the discriminatory gap turns out to be 19.9%. So you multiply 9.9% times 1.119, and that gives you 1.199, and that gives you 11.9%. And we partition that between the race conscious portion and the race neutral portion. So what would have happened had you used the methodology that you used in previous years? And this is what I'd like to share with you. Had you used the DBE method and believed 114
48113.
if you that's 66% of your dollars, if you actually counted the 3 DBE, which gives you a very small percent of the DBEs, then your availability rate will be 4.8%. Using the technology, the method that they use to make the adjustment is actually not the most appealing methodology. But what it says is just take all the dollars for the past 3 years, the past 5 years, find the median, find the difference between the base goal and the median, find about 2, and that's what your goal is. Now I'm going to tell you what the logic is. I mean, it's not really logic. It's that if you are overshooting your goals, your goal this year should be lower. If you're undershooting your goal, then your goal should be. Remember what we're doing is you take the base, add it to the median, divided by 2. So it's either higher or lower, depending. It was the same if it's the case that you hit your target exactly. Now that's not economically appealing, but it's in the guidance. But it has a footnote, and that the guidance has no legal standing. Well, anyway, if you had used that method, then the adjusted base goal, the base goal would have been 4.8%. The adjusted goal would be 9.4% or 9%, depending upon whether or not you use 5 years of data or 3 years of data. For EPA, the numbers would be 12.4% or 15.3%, depending about whether or not you use 3 years or 5 years of data. Let me say that the median depends on how many years you're looking at. If you're looking at 3 years, the median is pretty much the middle number. But if you're looking at 5 years or 8 years, the median is a calculation. It's not exactly intuitive about how you, it's basically line them up and find the one that's in the middle. And it turns out that there are a couple of years, like 2020, where EPA dollars, I think it's 2020. If you choose three years, but it's something like 20% of the payments. Now, there are 2 different ways to measure previous expenditures. One is to use payments, and the other is to use contract amount awards. And it turns out there are different reporting requirements, and it turns out that we have both sets of data to report both of them. So the bottom line is that there'll be a little bit of difference, but my recommendation is not to use the method you used in the past. Rather, my recommendation is to use the method that you could defend very vigorously in court, arguing that you're not picking and choosing in order to get the highest number or the lowest number, but rather you're averaging across all methods. Let me stop and take your questions.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I feel like I'm in a high-level college course right now and I'm completely fascinated by all of this. Just the fact that we've gone through, did you say 9 months we've been working on this? That's tremendous, that alone. And I think this is so valuable. So does the committee have any questions? Councilmember Barber?
Thank you, Madam Chair. More of a comment. We did have some of this presented, Ashanti, at Transportation Committee on Monday, but it's really great to hear all the numbers behind everything. So, as you know, I'm a numbers tech person, so I really kind of appreciate seeing everything. And this approach, instead of looking at, you know, medians over years and dividing, those things can get skewed so quickly by a large project that doesn't make much sense. Like I think one of the comments had, you know, spending is a little different for the next couple of years. Well, that's true because purple line and blue line are outside of this window. So those are the next big construction projects, which if we start looking at that are going to skew things. And so this is a more practical way of coming up with something that I think we can explain and has some good basis, more thought put into it. So I just really appreciate it. And I really appreciate you guys coming here today to kind of explain it all. So I think it was very helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Any other questions? Councilmember Pacheco, then Cedarburg.
Madam Chair, maybe it's even a comment. With the Latino Chamber, we applied for a grant through deed. And one of the forms that you filled out, it said that they literally crossed out the NASIC code as a requirement. And I'm not sure why, or you were mentioning it, and I said, I know when I looked at the forms, this was crossed out by them, but not by us. And I don't know if they're requiring it anymore or what happened, but check it out for me. Thanks.
Thank you. And Councilmember Cedarburg.
This was presented yesterday for the EPA to the Environment Committee, and so, and I had a kind of an odd question, and Ashanti can, you know, answer this as well, but can we round up our goals to like 12% for, you know, instead of 11.9? Is it easier to get people to think of 12% and calculate? Is it when you're doing all, and I understand the methodology and the numbers and anything like that, but can you do zeros and 0.5s? Or I'm just thinking just as a formulaic, as a easier to people wrap their heads around. Every year it changes and things like that.
I don't think anybody's ever been sued by family appropriately, so 11.5.
I would round it up to 11, like the
rounds up
EPA.
to 12.
Right. I don't know. Simpler for people to keep in their head and things like that. It was just a question.
Ashanti.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Stewart. Yeah, we had that conversation. I actually checked, or I didn't check. I had the small business unit manager check to see if there was anything in the regulations, and there wasn't. So what I will say is, yes, it's at our discretion. If we wanted to do that at the end of the process, I think it's important to also understand that we're in a 28-day comment period, or 30-day comment period that started on August 28th. And so it's not final, and it's good to hear Dr. Myers say he hasn't heard anyone get sued for doing that. So ultimately we could. I didn't find anything that would preclude us from rounding 11.9 to 12%.
Thank you, Councilmember Cedarburg. Thank you, Ashanti. I completely understand where you're coming from, but I'm kind of a precise person, and I also don't want people to go, wow, these look like really round numbers.
Right.
You know, is it precise or not? So
I understand that as well.
yeah. So well, at least we know there has not been litigation brought forward and lost on that point. Are there any other questions? Can I just ask one other question too? So have we excluded everything then? Did I hear right? And as I'm reading the slides, that if it's under a contract for 10,000, it's not being counted in this? Is that correct?
And the calculation of the adjustment, we ran regressions with and without the under 10,000. Because when we looked at the data, regression analysis is supposed to be based on an assumption of what the underlying distribution looks like. You really, we actually estimated the log distribution so that it looks more like a normal distribution. But those zeros, I'd say zeros, but those small numbers really kind of make the distribution look like it's a non-normal distribution. And so what does the analyst do? The analyst says, well, what would happen if I took those under 10,000 out? Okay, the 10,000 is kind of an arbitrary point. So I didn't consult with Ashanti to find out, what is the number where there's no debt? What's the number when, there's a discretionary amount. But in terms of the data, 10,000, under 10,000 was the part that was making that distribution look like it's a strange distribution. So most of the time you think of a normal distribution as looking like a bell, right? But with that 10,000, there's a whole bunch of 10,000s, or a whole bunch of zeros, a whole bunch of, small, amounts of money. So here's the point. Run it both ways. And as it turns out, with and without the under 10,000, as it turns out, there's really small difference in the estimated discrimination level. So to answer the question is, yes, we do include the 10,000. It's just that we also include the model without the under 10,000. And so both are part of the final calculation.
Perfect, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? And again, Ashanti, the comment period ends again when on this?
September 28th.
September 28th, okay, great. And I don't know if we've been getting any comments yet, but I'm very pleased that we're doing this. I know this is very important work that we're advancing at the council, and you and your team have been doing great work. But I think it's important to use methodologies that we can defend, and that, and I'm just stunned that EPA doesn't have their own guidance on this, but okay. But I guess I'm just thanking you on behalf of this committee for all of your hard work, and I look forward to, seeing, where we end up with these new goals.
Madam Chair, Council and Committee members, thank you. I do want to say that there is a virtual public comment event, for lack of a better term. So please spread the word if you have folks that are interested in providing comment. That is tomorrow.
From 2 to 4 p.m.
2 to 4 p.m. And it's virtual. You can, I believe there is information on our website, or folks can contact myself or Megan's contact information as well.
Okay, great. Well, with that said, thank you very much, and thank you, Doctor, for joining us here today. This has been fascinating work, and we appreciate your expertise in helping guide us. So with that, Ashanti is going to stay with us, and we are now on information item 2, and we will be looking at the MCUB initiative goals, disaggregated data, gaps, opportunities, and we've got a presentation on this as well. So Ashanti, it's back to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This work that I'm about to cover, really, we do it every 2 years. It gives us a sense of where we have gaps, where we need to perhaps focus some of our resources and efforts to make improvements and head in the direction that we want. So we look at different data points, both qualitative and quantitative, and various performance indicators to give us some information about how we are administering our program and those results. So one of the things that we look at is our directory, our MCUB directory. And I think it is important to note that the MCUB program is not a separate certification. It is a combination of certifications. So the CERT program that is operated by the City of St. Paul and includes Hennepin and Ramsey County and I believe Western Wisconsin, Hudson area, and then disadvantaged business enterprise firms that have a primary location in the state of Minnesota, Minnesota veterans certified firms, target group certified firms, for a total number of 1,762 firms. So how does that break down by ethnicity and gender? So this is important too to see where, I mean, I know in talking with, hearing comments from Councilmember Pacheco and others, that we know that there's a large number of small businesses in the Hispanic community, Latinx community, but they're not certified as much. So we know that that's an area that we need to focus some outreach efforts and some other efforts relative to understanding if there are barriers, understanding if there are reasons why they are not seeking certification. And also, just as important as the source is our MCUB directory, and the date that we pulled this data was on June 30th of this year. So what does our actual participation look like? So both in the awarded contracts comparatively from 2021 to 2022 saw both increases for MCUB firms, primes and subs. Also, what we look at, there's a lot of times post-award where we get MCUB participation after the bid or after award as work gets added or modified, and they bring on additional MCUB firms. And then in terms of dollar-wise and in percentage, it's just that number has continued to go up. So we're moving in the right direction. And of course, we're not where we desire to be, but we are moving in the right direction. And then at the breakdown by race and gender, of course, what stands out is women of color, businesses owned by women of color, has been a focus of ours since 2021. It remains a focus relative to both our outreach efforts and some of the initiatives that we've been conducting over the past couple of years. And then in terms of dollars as well, the one thing that I would point out on this is both Black-owned businesses and Asian Pacific businesses had decreased in dollars from 2021 to 2022. All the other racial categories had increases. But I would also point out that over 2019 and 2020, that was different. So it's going like this. We got to figure out how to get it balanced.
Ashanti, I have just a quick question. So I don't know what the size of all these contracts are, but we have large contracts and there are subs, and is it sometimes the timing of when the contracts or the payments are made too? I mean, there's work going on. How does that, in 1 year they start something and it's a 3-year I don't know how the timing might be impacting these numbers if people are tied up working on certain projects, or I don't understand. Maybe you don't understand my question either, but I'm just trying to understand if timing can be an issue when contracts are let, payments are made, and the length of the contract on any of this.
Madam Chair, Council and committee members, all of those points are relevant in terms of sometimes the work can be cyclical, and then also the timing in terms of payments. But that's why it's important to both look at commitments, awarded commitments, and payments to really create a clear picture of the health, strength, and where the direction of your program is going.
Ashanti, one more quick question. depending on the work that we're doing, and again, some of our biggest investments certainly are around transportation projects. Are we ever running into a case and point where we've got minority business owners that are capable of doing it, but they're wrapped up in one project, and so another project is sitting out there and they just don't have the capacity to jump into that? Is that part of the reason, or have we not hit that issue at all?
Madam Chair, I believe that does happen, and I think it really happens, I would say, like on our EPA work, because we don't have a lot of DBEs, we don't have a lot of primes that bid that work. So as we talked about the low sample size and calculating that methodology, one of the things that goes into that calculation is success rate. So there was one DBE prime award over the study period. That DBE only bid on one project, I mean 3 projects. So you would assume a success rate of 33%. However, then if you extrapolate that out, and I'm going to use a number that I can calculate in my head, if you had 48 contracts, that would assume that same DBE would be awarded 16 projects, and that's just not possible. So yes, we do run into that, and I'm sure DBs have that. They would say that was a good thing that it's happening, but that does happen from time to time.
Okay, thank you.
And again, this is MCUB dollars by gender, and that same disparity exists that did with the number of contracts. And another one of the things that we like to look at is what are the top scopes of work, both by dollars and number of contracts. Where's the utilization occurring in what areas? What's the type of work? Installation services, electrical work led the way for that analysis. So it's important for us to understand, one, where our strengths are, and then two, maybe where we need to focus some more effort. And then we also did this analysis by the number of contracts and the firms, and you can see who, and by gender and race, where those contracts are going, the top performers. And then the names of contractors by dollar value. Again, gender and race, a little bit more equitable distribution for the dollars versus the number of contracts. But here are the firms, the major firms. I would point out that the one firm, USA Afrique, had not performed work with the council prior to 2020, but has seen over $2 million in terms of contracted work with the council. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you very much. Does the committee have any questions? Councilmember Pacheco.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I mean, as Ashanti spoke to, we've been working also with both the equity that is on this other side thing. And when your question was how we get people certified, I mean, that's for us with the community, it's getting the certification, and I don't know if the dollars would grow depending on that. And the example I use is that there's about 19,000 Latino businesses that were either registered with the Secretary of State's office or deed. And when, but if you look at to get a contract with the Department of Transportation or us or anyone else, you have to be certified. So, and the certification is done by the Minnesota Department of Administration. So if you go to corrections or anything else, you go through that certification. So I talked to the Department of Administration as well, how many Latino businesses do you have that are certified now and can do work tomorrow? And not who have contracts for that, there's 88 out of almost a little over 19,000 businesses. And so we're looking at it, so what is the problem, if it's just certification or how and why we're doing this. And I looked at the survey that you all are funding, the small business survey. I'm waiting for that to come up, because that's going to give us some real clear data that I'd like to use as well. But so our direction is to get as many people certified at this point, and also looking at what were the barriers in the first place. And I wasn't looking at quotas, and I'm looking at your dad's affirmative action. What we're looking at is how do we get as many in the pool to be then do the work. That's one thing. The second is that another issue is that having these smaller companies, they hit a plateau. They maybe have one contract. They hit a plateau and they don't get much bigger. And some of them are even stifled from getting bigger because they like them where they are. And then so we're looking at that and where we're looking at too is that there was a Department of Transportation project maybe a couple of years back that looked at, they have a prime contract and you can do like these little cutouts in the corner where you ride your bike down in the cement there. So they can do Mortensen and do all of them. Or they can have Cruise contract construction do 20 of them for the summer or some percentage. They still work gets done. We're using a prime, and we're also providing an opportunity for some of these smaller companies that don't have the bonding capacity or the other capacity that just has access to capital. And so I think that's one thing I think down the line we need to start looking at as well, some of these different ways to approach how we reach goals like this. I've just met with a company last week, Tico is this? They do snow removal. And now that some of their big contracts, they wanted to do the landscaping as well. They just wanted to, and they have Best Buy, Target, these are big commercial snow removals. They said, well, rather than me hiring people through you all, through the chamber here, is that we want to hire a manager. We want to hire a team, and I don't care if they have contracts on the side. And I went to their warehouse, they have huge equipment. They have the big salters in it. So now if you come on the team, you can hire whoever you want, and we'll give you a contract and guarantee for 2 years. And then help you with our equipment. And so that it works well because they're not individual, and they did hire 2 of the people we sent over there anyway, but they're not trying to pick away at it. They're trying to have one chunk, and now they want to do some training around it. And so I think people are starting to look at, this is not a detrimental program where I got you type thing, and why aren't you doing this all about race or this or that. We're looking at what is it? The race question is done just by the growth. If you stood still, we would pass you. And so it's what's going on out there. So it's just being a little bit more creative as we go forward and how we want to hit some of these goals or how we can really develop small businesses by some of the awards that we make. We're doing millions and billions in contracts here. There's got to be a way that we maximize the use of those things.
Thank you, Councilmember Pacheco. We're really fortunate to have you in your role as president of the Latino Chamber here with the Met Council, of course, and on this committee. And we've been, I don't know, I've been here some for 4.5, 5 years or more. And we've been talking about this, and so to have your expertise and actually in the trenches building the models and the relationships to do it is huge. Are you getting other chambers, or other interest groups, other associations, other whatevers, as you're trying to figure out the secret sauce behind all this, just so that it can scale throughout the regions, and CEI, any of those coming in any sort of measure alongside or in their own work?
Well, as you hear the data from the other reporting is that it's hard, they don't always measure the same things. So the Women Venture may measure something different. And like City of Minneapolis, when they contract, they don't require citizenship. In the state, they require having that on there. So there's different ways that we're looking at how to measure it and how to promote it. But we're open to work with everyone, and we have some workshops. I have actually going to be hosting one coming up on cannabis. So I have the Hmong Chamber and the Black Chamber and our organization. Others say, look at, if we don't get involved now, that train's going to leave rather quickly. And so what is it that's there? And if you look at the social equity components of that, it's very minimal. Once they got through expungement, they really haven't talked about the 11 other categories where they're going to be hiring, and could be everything, from ventilation systems to everything else. People are looking at it. So that's kind of work done. So don't tell anybody this, and this they shouldn't be on here, but Next week, the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce is acknowledging or recognizing Minnesota Latino Chamber of Commerce as the Chamber of the Year. And so let's go to Orlando and get the, they didn't say anything about a check, but but I'll be going there and get something anyway.
Well done and well deserved, and we can't wait to hear all about it when you get back. You know, I just again appreciate your work and your open-mindedness and, you know, just the perspective that you're bringing to this and for continually bringing us in a loop on where we're at. And again, as always, we'll spread the word on tomorrow's listening session, whatever, 2 to 4. Hopefully we've reached out to partners that have the same interests as us to be included in that. And, you know, we look forward to the next round of reporting. But thank you, Ashanti, to you and your team and everybody here at the council who knows that this is a major priority for us and everybody else who's coming alongside to get the work done. So we appreciate you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, Council, and committee members. And thank all of those at the council who worked to gather all that data for Dr. Myers and his team.
Yes,
it was a burden, so I was more than happy to recognize that team for a hero award that they received. So congrats and kudos to them.
And I would just second that. I mean, we know that we've got the best research data team here at the council, and we never want to take them for granted. So that's awesome. And I would just say this: for people who don't know what the Met Council does, except for 1 or 2 things that ends up in the media, this is some of the great work that we're doing, and there's much more of it. So everybody, from wherever you are, whether you're at the Capitol, or you're in Greater Minnesota, you're down the street, you know, we've got great stories to tell, and we're very happy to hear about them here in management. So thank you again. All right, seeing no other business to come before this body, meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.